Good morning. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm the conference chair for streaming media events. And when I'm not programming or running these events, I'm the CMO of Ideas. Welcome to our 6th Streaming Media Connect. We're going to be back in Huntington Beach for Streaming Media West in November. And the program just went live this morning, or actually this week. Steve Nathans-Kelly, our producer, will pop the link to the program in the chat. But we're thrilled that we're now bringing you 4 events per year, 2 virtually and 2 in person. This is our 2nd Streaming Media Connect for 2022, and we had Streaming Media Boston or Streaming Media East in Boston back in May. Can't wait to get back to Huntington Beach in November for Streaming Media West. And if you're interested in speaking, please contact me and let me know. We do have slots open. Again, I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm the conference chair. I'd like to thank our diamond sponsor for Streaming Media Connect. That's Media Silo, and we have a brief message from them. And I would also like to thank the sponsor for this session, Fortinet. And Fortinet's John Jacobs will be joining this panel in just a moment. Before we jump in, though, a few housekeeping notes. Just for being here, you are entered into a random drawing for an Amazon gift card, and we'll announce the winner at the end of each session. And that will be, and the reason it's at the end is because you must be present to win. So toward the end of the session, we'll pick a name and award an Amazon gift card, and the winner will receive that next week. If you have questions for our panel, please put them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom window rather than in the chat. It just makes it easier for us to keep track of them there. And once the panel gets close to wrapping up, I will relay the Q&A to our speakers. And the panelists will answer those questions live at the end of the discussion. Also, you'll notice that subtitles are turned on. If you want to turn them off, you can go to Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen, click on the caret next to it, and select Disable Transcript. So for the next hour, we're going to be talking about the edge in media content delivery, and we've got the perfect moderator for that discussion, Mark de Jong, who is the Executive Director of the CDN Alliance, right, Mark?
Chairman, yes.
Chairman, okay, that works too.
Yeah.
And Mark will take it from here, and he'll introduce our panelists. So take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Eric. Well, thank you everybody for being here. We have a full session today about edge compute and content delivery. We have 4 panelists. So I would like to give you a small introduction about the four panelists before we head off with all the different questions. JT, can I start with you as the first one?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. It's great to be here. Very excited. Going to be a cool panel. I'm Jason Tebow, the Executive Director of the Streaming Video Technology Alliance. We're a global technical association. We bring member companies together in a collaborative forum to solve critical technical challenges of delivering high quality video at scale. So we're a big organization. Come join, have fun.
Thank you, JT. Next one on the list is PC Bakai from Disney. Can you tell a little bit about yourself, PC?
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Yeah, you can all refer to me as PC, probably the easiest thing to do. I'm a video delivery architect in Disney streaming, and I'm part of the media distribution team that is responsible for delivering video bytes for all of our streaming products, which includes D+, Hulu, ESPN+, and Star Plus in LATAM. And I'm also associated with a couple of standards organizations, including SVTA, which is where JD kind of referred to, but also CTA Wave, where we're working on open caching and also common access token and other things such as CMCD, CMSD, and request tracing. So nice to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks, PC. Next one is John Jacobs.
Hello, good day. Often referred to as JJ, but I won't get too many people confused, so we all have an acronym. I'm with Fortinet, a global solutions provider for security throughout the world, from edge to cloud. I serve in the role of a field CISO, which is for our high technology vertical covering media and entertainment. And our goal and role is really to provide solutions for security of content in both at rest and in distribution, whether that's for an individual user or provider or CDN in that realm. So look forward to the conversation today, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, John. Kevin Yao from Amazon.
Thank you, Mark. My name is Kevin Yao. I'm in the industry for over 20 years. When I first started, our backhaul consists most of T1 and T3 lines. We were using ATMs, not the banking machine where you go and take out cash, but asynchronous transfer mode, with 48 bytes payload. So we were using ATM at the time because it has a better price to performance compared to the internet protocol of today. And hopefully we could talk more throughout the things about the evolution. And currently I'm the principal solution architect focusing on global direct-to-consumer space with Amazon partners. We have more than 400 AWS partners in the media and entertainment space against 5 solution areas. I work with my partners to set strategic vision and connect the vision between the technology and the business initiative. So my job is to help the partner to move fast, develop and differentiate their value proposition, and enable them to grow the business. So in today's talk, I'm hoping to share my knowledge and continue to learn from each of the panelists as well.
Thank you, Kevin. Perfect. So the first question I would like to ask to everybody is really about the definition of edge, right? So edge is a non-defined word. Everybody uses edge in different ways and forms. So I would like to have a little bit of understanding on how everybody's vision is on what edge actually is for each other. JT, I know you have been in the industry for a while, and I know edge has been part of the SVTA as well. So can I start off with you as the first one?
Absolutely. Yeah, just for me and for the SVT, I think the definition of the edge is really dependent upon the use case. So, in media, obviously, you can do lots of things that are quote unquote on the edge of the network that improve latency, that obviously improve time to first byte and things like that. So there are both workflow applications like encoding, right? Move that out further, get things encoded or transcoded quicker. And then there's also viewer experience things, right? So caching, right? Get content out deeper, closer to the user. Again, reduce that latency, reduce that time to first byte, have a better viewing experience. So, for us, really the edge is, it's a moving target, right? So it can be at the edge of the physical network in the peering fabric. It can be, at the tower for the mobile and at the end of the RAN. It can actually be down in the home, right? Right next to the devices or even on the device itself. So I know that's kind of an amorphous definition of edge, but it really just sort of follows the use case of where the edge of your network for that use case is.
Thanks. Kevin, coming from an AWS perspective, what's your vision on what the edge is?
Yeah, I can agree with most of what Jason said. Before we talk about edge, I want to talk about CDN in a very simplistic way. A CDN to me is a service that accelerates internet content delivery. That's very basic definition. And the purpose of CDN service is to securely deliver that content. The content can be static, such as data, video, applications, or it could be dynamic, such as APIs. Now you might say, like in stream media, most of our assets static, but I think we're evolving to a dynamic content as well. There's a lot of interactivity going on. There's a lot of streaming data queries and involve changing of API as well. And all of those that require very low latency and high transfer speed to eliminate and reduce the infamous circle, right? The buffering. So I think there are 3 main points to the edge service. Number 1 is to help customers to improve the overall experience by leveraging a global backbone infrastructure and all the edge nodes to the point of presence. The edge, like Jason defined, could be as close as to the end user as possible. And number 2 is to improve security posture by not exposing the origin to the end customer it kind of alleviate our origin servers from getting DDoS attacks and other web exploits. And number 3 is to reduce the data cost of transfer. So instead of going directly out to the internet in traditional on-prem data center, the customer can offload the demand from their origin, so saving the scaling and transfer costs in the process.
Kevin. Talking about security, John, can you dive a little bit further than that from your point of view?
That tends to always be our buzzword. And to us, it really is that point of either user interaction or where that content becomes, or where that distribution point becomes relative to the user or consumer. As Jason mentioned, it could be variable based on where it is. Our focus really is, how do we secure that? He mentioned a couple different references. 5G is a good one. What do we do for security at that node, at the wireless radio point? Or is it encrypted on the end user device? And is security the primary focus for that end user? Today, most of the focus, most of the actual direction is in CDN based. So we're pushing that content way out to the edge. And what we're here to do is help people secure it there, and then provide a secure delivery mechanism to the end user, being the ultimate goal of all of ours, right? So for that delivery. And just the last point would be to pivot off of what Kevin said, there is more and more bi-directional, which brings in a new element of interaction. So as users are doing short form video or that type of interaction, we see an even increased need for not only availability and speed, but reliability, integrity check on those end users and on the devices. So pretty complex, but I'll leave it at that, because like you said, it's a long definition.
Yeah, it's a very long definition. And the funny thing is, and that's a bridge to PC as well. With the last Content Delivery Summit, we had Akamai there talking about Jeff on the edge. I'm not sure for the ones that saw it. Pankaj, you were there as well as one of the speakers there at the Content Delivery Summit, so you're aware of this. So from a practical standpoint, being a user of those edge services out there, what's your vision on this? What the edge means actually?
Yeah, that's I just wanted to touch base on that perspective, because knowing what an edge is, but actually using edge, I guess the definition becomes more amorphous. As JD mentioned, for us as a customer who uses CDNs for delivering our content, our edge is really how far or how close the CDN is to the end user. We don't really know what is in the last mile. The last mile could have many hops to it, but it's really our relationship with our CDNs. But the relationship has also evolved because we are using different CDNs and different partners who are actually taking these boxes of compute and storage much more closer to the end user. I won't cite names, but boxes are on planes, in trains. They are at the home locations as well too. And that has definitely kind of changed how we look at content delivery. And we end up looking at the whole stack, not just from the delivery point of view, but also from the player point of view, as to how can we leverage that short hop, which brings storage closer to the end user, but also compute capabilities. So edge is evolving definition for us, and it's really for us a function of our partners that we use. Now, definitely there are a lot of use cases as well too, which we'll probably go into later on. But that's kind of how we look at it. Now, of course, the other thing is as we build our own and CDN, which is Disney Edge, the definition changes a little bit too, because now the practical considerations come in with our CDN and other CDNs as well too. And that brings another topic of multi-CDN, makes a big mess of the whole situation. So yeah, I mean, it's there. We are really excited for that. But I think it's ways to go before we can actually kind of start using it nicely.
Thanks. Second question I have, which is related to this, but is more on the practicality of this. So what are typical use cases? So I'll stay with you at PC for now, for the first one. So use cases. So what are typical use cases you use it for, or intend on using for the next 3 years?
I won't take the whole hour. The things that we have historically needed or have used, I'll kind of just touch base on that. I think when COVID started famously in Europe, bitrate reduction kind of came into play, and hence the manifest manipulation capabilities. And in that journey, we found it very interesting when we started evaluating the different CDN partners of ours, that they provided different ways in these capabilities are available. So manifest manipulation is either available as a feature, a checkbox, or just write your own code and do the thing that you need to do. So that was definitely kind of one thing for us. Ads becomes very interesting, or any interstitial content. The ability to splice in something, and SSAI is a perfect example for that. Now we have evolved to SGI as well too, with the HLS interstitials. Those are great reasons why edge compute is very interesting for us. And then on the one optics here is that edge has always been, or CDN has always been used as a content delivery mechanism. And it's generally a key value pair, wherein the request comes in and we look for the object in cache and we deliver it. But there's a lot more that can be done with respect to adding intelligence. And so on the standard side, the CMCD and the CMSD spec that is coming on the CTA wave side of things, they provide a lot of metadata that the edge can use to do fun and fancy stuff, such as prefetching of the object, computing analytics, understanding where the player is with respect to play start, what buffering is happening or not. And so I think there's a lot of kind of capabilities that open up once you provide the metadata and allow some compute to the end user. So I'll kind of stop on that and let other people speak in as well too.
I'll move to John. John, I'm sure you're aware of the attack that happened on Google, the DDoS attack that happened. What was it, last week or this week? Last week.
Yeah.
They stopped it at the edge, right? That was their focus area. They stopped security on the edge. So is that a use case you guys are looking at as well? How do you look at this from your point of view?
Yeah, it's actually it's a great point. And really the idea that from an aggregate level now, the amount of content and the amount of users is continuing to grow. There's no question. And it brings into light, I think that was the largest recorded denial of service to date. And yeah, we actually work in concert with both the providers, the content networks, everybody essentially, to say we've got to work together to provide the right things in place, that now this scale, regardless of where it lives, has to be able to block and redirect at scale and at speed, which is increasingly difficult as the network continues to grow and speed up and distribute. But we think with the right level of integration, and I think that's one of the big challenges that we all face. And it's not for one provider to solve or one content distribution to solve. It really is the idea of how do we stitch this together? How do we get intelligent information so that you're blocking the bad users or the bots that are out there, versus denying content to a legitimate user, something we never want to do. And that really is a focus of where we have with those, we call them the hyperscale providers themselves, AWS being one of them as well. So we work with them, but also try to merge that with the actual owners of the content so that there's a validation of integrity at that level. So yeah, great use case, great example.
Yeah. So if you look at edge, right? If you look at edge compute, edge storage, edge delivery, we look at bidirectional traffic. Actually, we look at not just one from a delivery standpoint, but we also look at from the other side. So it gets more, let's say, complex in terms of edge, but also gives a lot more capabilities that we have. Another topic on this, and of course, there's CDNs, there's clouds, cloud environments. Now edge is there. So JT, from your standpoint, we have CDNs, we have clouds. Will edge overtake what we're now doing in terms of CDNs, what we're doing in terms of clouds right now?
Well, again, that goes back to that sort of amorphous definition of the edge, right? It's depending on the use case. You think about the edge as from distributed, from dense to distributed, right? So you have the traditional data center approach to content delivery, right? So I'm going to peer with CDNs at these peering fabrics, and we're going to deliver out that way. So there's a handoff between, basically content dumping by the CDN onto the operator's network. So let's say you move that out to an edge model, right? So now we're talking about that there's not really a handoff per se at a peering fabric, because that content probably already exists and is distributed out across the edge. But again, it really depends upon, where that edge is in relation to the use case. So if you look at the edge in relation to the use case of the workflow, right? So now you're talking about serverless functions that are out in that distributed edge versus from the end user perspective, where you're talking about that content being out there at the edge. The way that the CDN is going to evolve really depends on the use case. CDNs, like to what Pankaj said, that the CDN is going to evolve in a sense of it's going to do more than just deliver content, right? It's going to deliver experience. And so part of that experience is going to be related to the workflow, right? So let's stick logic as close to the user as possible, and let's automate it, right? So let's do things automatically. So our operations people aren't making decisions. The system is making decisions. The CDN is making decisions as it's pressed out to the edge. And so then you talk about the experiences that can be delivered to the viewer as part of that. Now you're thinking interactivity and whatnot. So as the CDN pushes further out, depending upon the use case, it's going to be doing more in relation to what that streaming video experience is, both from operationally and from the end viewer.
Thanks. Good explanation there, GT. Kevin, jumping to you. This one, from an AWS perspective, you guys do cloud, obviously. You guys do CDN, the cloud front, but you also do edge. I know initiatives in sort of edge in telco environments and stuff. Can you give your view on this particular point?
Yeah, I would like to take a different approach. So for me, if I can explain this to my 4-year-old, then I think I could explain it pretty well. So if I were to explain to my 4-year-old, I would say edge is mostly one way, but there are bidirectional interactions that we talked about. So I would say to him, like, think of edge as a postman, a post person that does mail delivery to your house. It's based on your address, and the mail needs to be delivered today. So the postal worker will have to go to your house and deliver that piece of content to you as a consumer. Now, in return, you might have to give him a mail or return something, put the flag up on your mailbox so he could take that content back. Now, CDN is kind of both ways. So the mailman is going to go back to his local post office and process the aggregate traffic or mail in this case there. And there's also PO boxes that can be stored for caching purposes. And lastly, you have the main processing center. So think of that as a cloud or central hub. So a typical consumer don't usually go there, but that's where a lot of main processing, the heavy load is taking place. So take Amazon, for example. We have a lot of names, and I'm not trying to get into names, EC2, CloudFront. So I'll just speak in general terms. So Amazon, for example, to enhance edge, we have local zones. Local zones is type of Amazon infrastructure that place compute, storage, database, and other services closer to a larger population, industry, or IT centers that enable customer to enable delivery application, require very small millisecond latency to the end users. Next to it, we have wavelength. Wavelength zones are most deployed for 5G networks, where there are AWS infrastructure deployment that embedded AWS compute and storage services within the telco provider data center at edge of their 5G networks. And lastly, what if the customer doesn't want to go to AWS to run their workloads? Then we will just bring AWS to them by Outposts. Outposts is a family of fully managed solution that deliver AWS infrastructures, coming a full server rack to the on-prem or edge locations. So that means the customer can have AWS hardware where they need it the most, and connect to the hardware like they're in a part of AWS region. So hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, I guess a good different view of the different parts. That actually is a nice bridge to the next question I have, which is really about the ecosystem, right? So we have cloud on one end, we have CDN that typically are more distributed architecture, and eventually we have telco that deliver the content or compute or storage or whatever towards the end users, and even that is divided in core up to the brand in the end. So there are different layers of that. I'm going to jump to JT on this first, knowing you know the ecosystem very well from different aspects. If you look at the ecosystem and edge infrastructures that are out there, there needs to be cooperation with the ecosystem to make that all work. Do we see any issues there? Is that an opportunity? Is that an issue that we will end up with? What's your take on this, JT?
Oh, okay. So first, I'm gonna ask that we stop compartmentalizing network functionality for streaming media, right? There's no cloud, there's no, there's no telco. It's all distributed compute, right? So it's a big fabric. And the reason I say that now is because most DevOps work in containers, and containers within the microservices architecture are managed by solutions which are cross-platform, cross-provider, right? So I can have multiple clouds, multiple edges as part of my architecture, and I manage the distribution of my containers and the spin up, spin down, et cetera, across all of those providers centrally. So that's a big change that we've seen over networks, in the past like 10 years. And a lot of that's because of, network, NFV and all sorts of, things that have been done on the network side. So I want to start there. Like we need to get out of that thinking of compartmentalizing and just see this as really distributed compute that spans across providers. So in terms of the ecosystem, and everybody cooperating together, no, there's not really a problem there, right? Because when you start looking at compute fabric as a commodity, right? That's really what it is. The resources themselves are commodity. When you start seeing it that way, providers want to come together to make sure that there's a standardized approach, because if there's not a standardized approach, they're not going to be in the mix of that compute fabric that, let's say, like a Disney, a content provider, is going to use to spread across all of their use cases for streaming video, right? So that may be, again, encoding, transcoding, DRM, security. That may be things like WAF. That they're not going to spread these things across them because that provider is not taking a standardized approach within the industry, and hence, I can't use them, right? This is like one of the big use cases for open caching, right? So open caching provides lots of business benefits and lots of performance and speed benefits, but for content providers, it allows them to manage all of their delivery architecture, the caches across all of these disparate networks that are owned by individual companies from a single control plane, right? That's a big issue in terms of when you start talking about distributing out things. So again, if edge is all about distribution, distributed compute, then in order for people to play together, they have to come together and collaborate on the things that are important to those customers who want to use that distributed fabric, right? So things like protocols and the way things interconnect and configuration interfaces and all of that stuff has to be standardized. We don't see a problem with that. We have lots of our member companies are already coming together to define some of the ways those things work. They're competitors, right? They sit across the table from each other, but they know they have to work together or the end customer is not going to use it.
Agreed. Like a Disney in the end, right? So John, from a security standpoint, typically security is even more complicated if you start doing distributed architectures, distributed capabilities. So how do you look at this from your point?
Yeah, it does in some sense. I think JT made a great point, which is if there is a standard compliance architecture or communication, that makes it easier, right? We start to develop compartmentalized but homogeneous distribution mechanisms that a provider can then use and just distribute out. I'll go back to Kevin's analogy of the Postal Service, not because I think that's a great business example. Somebody tried it, I think. But no, the idea that before you could use another provider, and let's be candid, when they were mailing out Blu-ray discs, they didn't get to that point. But think about this, they would have had to trust that provider, whether it was UPS or FedEx or another delivery mechanism. The goal was the most consistent delivery platform that was known was the Postal Service. They never got to, we could ship these via UPS because there wasn't a standard from the Postal Service to UPS to ensure that same delivery mechanism. I think the same thing is true here. And if we do have security language that could say this is a known container, an open cache that's validated, if you can secure and identify those two things, then that marriage becomes actually pretty seamless and you can automate. And that's really our ultimate goal, is to automate this to the level that security is present, but not any type of hindrance. And then we can push it out to that open cache or to that, wherever that edge lives. And we've got a great experience.
Thanks, John. That's a good example. PC, multi-CDN. I mean, you live it, you breathe it. I know. Now, multi-CDN in regards to delivery mechanisms in general. Now, if we look at edge and edge capabilities out there, how do you see this happening in terms of what you want to do on the edge? And you want to use multiple providers on this from your standpoint, from a content provider standpoint?
Yeah, I'll say this, that if you're doing OTT, you have to be multi-CDN, at least for Disney, for the geo scale and such. But then just doing content delivery, just the bit delivery aspect of that, it's extremely complex, and which is where JD referred to the standard side of things. It's addressing these very critical but mundane sounding things that are absolutely essential for a content provider to even entertain an idea of partnering with a CDN partner to do the bit delivery for them. Now throw in edge compute on top of that, again, the problem compounds. And I guess just to give an example, again, back to the COVID days, pre-COVID days, wherein manifest manipulation or bitrate reduction was an aspect. And I think it's controlled by what is available in the manifest file, because then you have a central control to define which geos, which ASNs should have an access to which kind of the bitrate ladder. And even then, it seems like manifest manipulation is such an old topic, but even then, across all of our CDN partners, they had different solutions for solving this problem. As I mentioned earlier, it's a checkbox versus write your own JavaScript versus your REST, WebAssembly, or containers. And we leaving that exploration with, everybody can solve the problem, but not everybody can solve the problem in the same way, which will make our lives easier. Because to solve that problem would have required us to maybe hire one person for the container side of things, one person for WebAssembly, another person for the checkbox operation side of things. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but that's the kind of complexity we are left with. So standards are absolutely important in not just the very basic things, but obviously on the edge computer side as well too.
Thanks, Lizzie. Kevin, jumping to you from an AWS perspective, of course, you have your own. You already mentioned your own architecture and ways to deploy this across different networks, across different ecosystems. How would you cooperate with other ecosystems that are not your own? Do you see any future in this on how AWS would do this, or how do you see this in general happening?
Yeah, I agree with what PC said. I think it's a lot more complex. And to Jason's earlier point, both operation and architecture, whenever multi-CDNs is involved. I mean, the driver for multi-CDN, in my view, is more aggregate capacity, wider coverage in regions, and improved resiliency and performance. However, this will increase your load on the origin, because now you have to deal with multiple CDNs pointing to the same origin. It will increase the operational efforts and lack of feature parity, like PC just mentioned earlier, because the CDN will have to go with the lowest common feature set, right? So there are a lot of optimization done on the edge and on the CDN, such as handling protocol optimizations, things, tricks that each vendors are doing differently. Like some example could be TCP fast open, TLS session resumptions. Those are basic ones. But how would you do request collapsing, persistent? How would you handle TCP congestion controls, cache to hit ratio optimizations? We're dealing with long tail content. That's where a VOD content is no longer present in a cache, and you want to eliminate the long tail. And how would you handle playback errors? So those are all add complexity to the architecture and during the outage and troubleshooting as well. And you will run, and like, the CDN to the edge, same with origin to the CDN, same reason applies. So whenever Edge have to deal with multiple CDNs, there's a lot of complexity involved in terms of dealing with, what's needs to be done before, during, and after. So before the deployment, you have to deal with planning, provisioning multiple CDNs to deal with your shared secrets and security tokens, make sure all your configuration is in sync, and set up the origins could be a challenge and adds complexity. And while using it, you have to figure out how to measure multiple CDN performances, measure the user experience, and figure out how to execute whenever there's outage. What's the best path to fail over to? Some of that could be automated, but I think currently in the industry, a lot of it is done manually. And afterwards, you need to understand what happens, right? You need to collect all the data and make sense of it. So I think ultimately it depends what's best for the customer.
Yeah, I think
And if
we'll
I can
do.
just, Mark, if I can add to that to
Yeah,
tie
yeah,
into
yeah. I was
standardization.
already. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, so the SVTA and CTA Wave are actually working on a joint project regarding the standardization of CDN tokens, right? So tokens are a huge part of the way CDNs operate with content platforms. The idea that everyone does tokenization differently, like if I was a content operator, I'd want to jump off a cliff. Like that is like the idea of managing that. It's just like, why do I have all of this logic I have to build to fix this? So this is where industry bodies get together and we're like, listen, let's solve this problem. Let's do a standard approach, get everybody involved, all the big players, all the major players, let's get everybody involved, solve this problem so that, to Kevin's point, at least one part of it becomes less complex. And hopefully that will, that'll improve over time as well to other aspects.
My cliff is just really standing on the table and jumping off, because we do have exactly the same problem. And operationally, it's very messy, because jokes aside, if you have a key compromise, then it's such a hassle, because now you have to operate with all the CDN partners. They speak different interfaces in how we can manage them. And the act of transitioning the key from the compromise to a new one is kind of painful. Now, thankfully, Common Access Token is the working group within CTA Wave, which is kind of working right now. It's in the final stages of defining the token format, including quite a lot of use cases as well too. So shout out to that org and the working group. And if you have any use cases that you're interested in, please kind of join in. They're doing great work there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just like to add on this. If you look at CDN and multi-CDN, that took a while for it to happen, but eventually it was a necessity to happen. And I'm pretty sure the same thing will happen with Edge over time, that we need to get that done to make sure that we build resilience, availability, and performance across different Edge ecosystems. So over time will come, but it will take a lot of talking. And I think even more if you look at it from a CDN specific standpoint. Jumping into what you already mentioned, PC, on operations. You say that the operations can become very complex. Can you highlight a little bit of what your experiences are and what you foresee as future challenges in that regard?
Yeah, I think operationally speaking, strictly focusing, well, maybe just to kind of set a baseline of what the problem is. Everybody kind of does things differently. They all do HTTP GET requests phenomenally great. But when you have to define course headers, when you have to define how the failure mechanism should happen from primary to an alternate origin, that results in a different kind of conversation we need to have with our CDN partners. Sometimes it's very self-serve. Sometimes it's a conversation so that the partners can understand exactly what we want to do and they will do it for us. And so that's the nature of the challenge. But then also, if we were to do it on our own, their APIs are different, the object models are different, even though semantically it's kind of one and the same thing, that we want you to handle cores in a specific way, but it's kind of gets done differently. And then edge compute is kind of very different as well too, in that sense, because what kind of capabilities are available? WASM, then which language? Is it JavaScript that you're making us available, or are you allowing us to just deploy containers, whichever code we want to? Or are you providing us checkboxes? And then if you just simply do, let's say, WASM, and then two different providers supporting two different languages. Now we got to have a person well versed in that code base, and then the code review process, and then there is the whole bunch of stuff on the operation side with respect to deployment, monitoring. And it's great to have edge compute as a means to POC, proof of concept, but to actually roll out in production and use it at scale, it's a totally different thing, because operationally it requires so much of effort and consistency across all our partners.
So we do still have a way to go to optimize a lot of stuff in that regard.
Yeah. And I hope that through these standard bodies, we can share the pain, and then make our pain points kind of visible so that we can work towards solving those problems. Yeah.
And I'll add to that, Pankaj is part of this group at the SVTA. We actually have a project called Configuration Interface, which is an attempt to standardize the way that content operators can configure, send out programmatic requests to make changes to not only their CDN and open caching partners, but potentially in the future, their edge partners as well.
To stay with you, JT, edge storage, right? Edge storage at the ultimate edge, let's say the user edge, let's put it that way. I mean, there are some companies in the area that are doing this. Side is doing something, Pantera is doing something on user devices. I know there's a working group within the SVTA on this as well. So what's your take on this, on edge storage on the edge, on the user edge in this case? What do you see?
Well, I mean, it's an obvious use case, right? If you can pre-position content down, into storage at the home, so maybe it's attached to the home gateway, or it's attached to a connected television or a connected device. I mean, that's the ultimate experience, right? So that the user is going to get the highest quality video they want, and it's going to be able to scale no problem on a home Wi-Fi with multiple people connected to it. So, that's open caching saw that opportunity, and yeah, we have lots of folks involved in that, like CDN, like they're focused on that as a business model. We have folks like Viasat involved, Western Digital. But I think actually even more interesting, there are other ways to get content down to that. Well, again, we'll call it the ultimate edge. Pantera is looking at how do you download it on the device, but what about OTA? What about ATSC 3.0 data casting, right? So we actually have a company, Arc Multicasting, right? The idea is they could push content down to an ATSC 3.0 radio in some connected television, and attached to that connected television is a 2 terabyte USB stick, right? So now we're talking about being able to push content into this little device so that it's available to not only the television set, but the entire home. So that is an obvious use case for, again, that viewer side of edge, right? Being able to get and push content way deep down so that it is immediately available. And then again, then you can use heuristics, and back to what Pankaj was talking about, do some magic a level above in a different edge to know what that user is watching and actually suggest content to them, right? So then you can change the whole content recommendation model of what they're seeing on that connected TV, because we know what they're watching that's been pre-positioned. So again, just lots of ways that this can explode out into a whole new type of viewer experience. So very important to push content down into the home.
Yeah, I would like to add to what Jason said. I think the technology certainly exists today. I also think people are very creative, right? Back to what John said way earlier, that we started with delivering Blu-ray discs and DVDs to people's mailboxes. Again, I think this technology exists today, and it just depends on implementation. If you look at our cable and telco industry, back when there's not a lot of fiber available, the set-top box has been doing this for a long time, especially in a rural area where they don't have high-speed internet, or sometimes they don't even have dial-up. They will pre-download the content into the hard drive of the set-top box for pay-per-view content. And then the user either just make a phone call and say, I want to purchase this content, here's my credit card, or they could go through the 56 modem route and wait 4 or 5 minutes, and then boom, you have the whole entire movie ready for you to be viewed.
John, from your standpoint, in terms of the growth of edge in general and manageability, also in relation to security, the automation of it, it's just exponentially growing, right? The number of devices is
Yeah.
growing, the edge locations is growing. We can only do this really with automation, which is, if you look at security, is a given, basically on machine learning as part of that. So how do you see this in terms of edge?
Yeah, and it is a compounding problem, right? Or a compounding challenge, I think, is a better way to look at it. I hats off to JT and the third party. I think that's crucial. Number one, just from there's always going to be sort of the Coke and Pepsi war if it's a streaming provider or a content provider who says this is the standard. And that's unfortunate because sometimes the best technology doesn't win in that case. But I would say from the automation perspective, we want to take it a half a step or a quarter step back and say, at the area of where PC is working with content, we need to automate those types of tasks. We actually have, there's a pretty big push in the security industry called SOAR, Security Orchestration Automation Response. It's fairly well known in the IT realm for, we use it for, say, phishing emails, and we go through and automatically look at them. We look at this has been populated before, who reported it, et cetera. And we take a volume of hundreds of cases down to one or none, and it's completely automated. I really think there's a great application for that in the content providers and the edge providers themselves. So many of these use cases or so many of these instantiations are repetitive that I think we can reduce the overall volume, by an enormous percentage by just automating those base level tasks. And the language now has become flexible and granular enough that it could be as simple as, content failed to load or end user not validated, whatever those things are, but to create a little if this, then that logic behind it. I think this is key at each level of distribution. And whether that problem stays the same, it's not the same from the content provider to the edge node, but they have the same types of problems. And we think there's a great security application right there for all of them that's really granular, really flexible. So I think that's the biggest step forward we can take today while the standards are processed, and then we enable that on those standards.
So we as a let's say a streaming industry, we can actually learn from what is happening in security IT industry in this case.
You bet.
Exactly. Very good.
That's
Okay.
a great point.
Yeah. Okay. From your perspective, as a kind of provider perspective, right? I already mentioned it about management and stuff. So if we say automation, machine learning, edge, what do you say about this?
Automation, machine learning, edge. I think the amount of data we generate across what the end user is consuming, what is the experience of consuming the data, any beaconing that may happen with respect to ad impressions and such, all of that, there is just a tremendous amount of data. And today, at least, we aggregate all the data into our kind of like a central place where we are teaching our kind of machine learning models and then sending it. And actually the training of the models and also the inference is all happening much farther away from the end user in our cloud locations. And back to JT's point about like networks, CDNs and clouds, it's rather just a amalgamation of really just these devices that support storage and compute. All of that is happening very far away from the end user. If we are able to actually bring this closer, then we can probably iterate through the cycle of learning and deployment much more quickly, because the similarity, I mean, if you do look at things from a grouping point of view, from a streaming performance, these groups are basically as a function of the end user device, the geography where they're coming from, and some other characteristics. And these characteristics are very localized. And so you could technically take that localized characteristics and the data coming from those areas into a localized kind of op deployment, where all of the data is being aggregated, consumed, models are being trained, and the inference can happen right then and there, instead of pushing everything in a centralized location and then running all that stuff there. It creates a challenge because now you're dealing with terabytes upon terabytes of data versus just partitioning it closer to the end user across the attributes that are common and localized to specific geos and ASN. So I think that's definitely one area wherein some of the edge compute machine learning stuff can be quite nicely deployed.
And then automation on top of it to make sure you can manage it properly.
And if I can add to that, PC, to Mark, to PC's point, that the way that streaming video workflows and actually DevOps and development in general are progressing, we went from virtualization to microservices, and now we're moving into serverless functions. It's not hard to imagine that there's little pods of data in these localized areas against which serverless functions are operating to carry out automation, right? So they're instantiated, they're destroyed, instantiated, destroyed. They're not existing perpetually, right? But the data is. So the data is being collected all the time, and these little functions act against them. That's the way that I think the architecture for streaming workflows is moving towards. It's not anywhere near there yet, but operators are starting to experiment with how do I deploy serverless functions out there to carry out little bits of operation in real time, super close to the user. So to Pankaj's point, like that's a great use case. And I see from what been talking with a lot of people in the industry, it is moving in that direction.
Same here. I'm going to ask one more question only to John in this case as the last one. This is really about data collection, especially if you look at personal information. And you're much aware of this. So with the data collection in general, we collect a lot of data, and we also collect a lot of user data. Now with user data comes security. How do we manage all this to make sure that this remains secure if it's so much distributed everywhere?
Yeah, well, you mentioned earlier, which is, and it's one of my goals, is to help the content distribution providers and organizers learn from the lessons of IT. So I've been in the IT industry for 20 years plus, and there have been a lot of hard lessons of, when we used to just gather user information, even from an IT perspective, how do we carry that? You look at the amount of organizations hacked today, it's one of the #1 things they go after. It's relatively low hanging fruit, right? And go hack the Windows server and find out LDAP, and there you go. I think we can pivot from those same lessons here. And even though it is more distributed, knowing that those distributed nodes are both secure and then accessible by only the parts of the organization and the people. We call this zero trust, but it's the idea that no one should have access, nothing should have access outside of explicit granted access for the time and the amount of information they need. So while that user information may seem, somewhat trivial or somewhat, disposable of, maybe its demographics or location, all of it should really just be treated as PII, personally identifiable information, and just brought into that same security ecosystem. So we implore everybody to do that. Really, the bar isn't that high because it's been done. So we can help people leverage that flip over from the IT world and just say, treat this the same way at a big scale.
Yeah, let me just quickly add to what John said. We should borrow from IT. The layer 7 protections where you have application attacks, SQL injections, account takeovers. Those could be easily prevented because we have been doing this for a long time. Layer 4, by applying rules to your application load balancers, API gateways. We should also need to block DDoS attacks. DDoS attacks, from multiple applications and sources. Those are all pretty well known and could be very well prevented if we implement it on day one.
Thanks, Kevin. Well, thanks everybody for contributing to this panel. Eric, I'm sure there are some questions.
Obviously this is a discussion y'all could have gone talking for another 5 hours and had plenty to cover, but we do have some questions from the audience. The first one is from Mosey Platt, who asks, what customer experience and security challenges does live streaming create for edge compute and CDNs? I've heard Apple TV Plus customers complain about an inability to rewind Major League Baseball game streams. Now, I'm guessing that that's an MLB business rule, not a technical limitation or problem, but in general, when you talk about customer experience and security challenges, how do those impact edge compute and CDNs? JT, you want to take that one first?
Oh goodness, I knew you were going to call on me. This is I'm gonna punt. This is a great question for Pankaj. I mean, Pankaj comes out of the Hulu space where obviously they have a lot of live and they're using a lot of. I think it'd be great for him to answer this question.
Thank you for volunteering my. No, I definitely. I think for live, the main thing is always buffering is the biggest concern, and because you want to have the user play to the live edge, and hence buffering is a concern, and hence the concern, or rather the decision generally, is that keep it simple, absolutely simple. So, which means that should we use something as fancy as edge compute? Probably no, but we should change the definition as fancy or not eventually, because it's just a function of how comfortable we are with something. Should you use a CDN or not back in the days, like 20 years ago, even if it existed or not? I mean, if edge compute becomes so prevalent from an operations point of view as well too, then it becomes a no-brainer that let's use edge compute. And where you could use edge compute is to actually trim out the bit rates. From an ad insertion point of view, also from a geo-blocking point of view, especially for like live streams. There is another case wherein for live content, when everybody's watching this cricket game, but then if people are not paying that, however subscription fee is, or for that one-time fee, there is going to be a lot of link sharing or screen scraping and such. And so being able to identify and then revoke or redirect or anything of or business actions that you want to take is also a function of edge compute. And so those are the different things that edge compute would allow you to do. And the challenge basically is right now for us is that just the operational, being able to make it operationally consistent across all our CDN partners, because that's not where we are today.
All right, great. Our next question actually is one that PC chatted me to say that he'd be willing to take, and I don't know if anyone will be able to follow up, but Andy Rosen is asking, why not build standards for tokens on ETSI and -IF CPICs? Amazon is all in already. PC.
Yeah, so tokens for content delivery, as we mentioned, every CDN has its own standard, but we are unifying that under Common Access Token, which is under CTA Wave. So there is already work there because we've suffered this pain of inconsistency for quite a number of years right now. CPICs, as I understand it, and I don't know if anything has changed recently, but CPICs is a means to convey secrets. Traditionally right now, it's the DRM secrets. But if somebody wants to, you can technically use CPICs to actually convey token secrets as well too. So I think those are two separate topics, but certainly we're trying to address the token issue through Common Access Token.
And Pankaj, I'm not totally familiar with CPICs, but is it really focused more in on the Dash use case than, and obviously Dash has its own methodology for, for chunking and segmentation and things like that. Is that, is CPICs applicable to HLS? Is it applicable to CMAF? Is it applicable to, older protocols?
I've worked on this like 5 years ago now. So when we first looked at it, it was very Dash centric, but in the spirit of making it compatible across different streaming protocols, including HLS, there was a provision to support HLS as well too. But I'm not close to it in the last 2-3 years now, so I can't really say that. But hopefully that hasn't changed. Yeah, but I think it's a generic way to kind of communicate secrets. Yeah.
All right. Well, we do have a few more questions, but unfortunately we are running out of time here. We will save those questions and send them to the panelists. And panelists, if you get a chance to take a look at those questions offline, I'm sure our attendees would appreciate it. Again, thanks so much. It's a topic that we could have gone on for much longer. The Amazon gift card winner for this panel is Keith Chow. So Keith, keep your eye on your email, and you'll be getting an email about that next week. I'd like to once again thank Fortinet for sponsoring this panel and Media Silo for sponsoring all of Streaming Media Connect. Our next session will be at 1 p.m. Eastern, and it's our keynote discussion between Streaming Media's Nadine Krefitz and Paramount's Jared Wilczynski about video monetization and ad operations at Paramount. So we'll see you then. Thanks so much.
Thank you.